Welcome to the Bearded Finisher Podcast, your one-stop show for all things finishing and coatings. Your host, Zach, and a variety of industry experts will guide you through the art of perfecting your finishing and business game. From seasoned pros to fresh faces, get ready for tips, tricks, and trends to elevate your knowledge and business to the next level.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bearded Finisher Podcast. I'm your host, Zach. Today's episode, we have got Mr. Peter Cutrona with Ravago Chemical North America. What's going on, Peter?
Not much, Zach. I love your handle, the bearded one. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just enjoying the good life here in the Pacific Northwest when I'm dodging raindrops most of the time.
I feel like we've been doing a lot of dodging down here in Texas. I think they were saying that Lake Waco, where I'm at, is like 16 or 18 feet above normal. Just the insane amount of rain that we've had. I'm over it.
I feel your pain because from, let's say, October till the 4th of July, that's pretty much life here in the Pacific Northwest. It may not rain as hard, but it rains pretty steady and it's pretty gray. We get a sufficient amount of sun breaks, but if you're not used to this, you know, people get a little depressed.
Yeah, I could see that. And I mean, down here in Texas, Central Texas, and up in Oklahoma, where I'm from, it's just been like tornado after tornado after tornado. It's been crazy spring.
What do they say? If you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes, it'll change.
Ain't that the truth? Well, let's kick it off, Peter. Let's start with your backstory. Tell us how you got started into the coatings world and then how that led to you at Ravago.
Well, Zach, it's a pretty long story. I'll try to keep it concise because I'm an old guy. I've been doing this, believe it or not, I've been in the coatings business well over 45 years. If I count the very first job I had as a 16-year-old, where I was born in Whittier, California. My first job in the coatings business was a paint store called Ameritone Paint Center of Whittier. I worked there for almost 8 years, on and off through college, and then eventually I got a job, a career sort of job, when I was 23 years old for Ellis Paint Company in Southern California, in East Los Angeles. And they hired me to be an outside salesman. I was all of 23 years old, didn't know anything about anything except I like people. And the manager recognized that might be an asset and talked me into coming on board with them. And the career sort of exploded from there. I worked for Ellis for about 20 years, mostly in sales. And then about 5 years, the last 5 years of my career, I managed a team of sales guys. I found that I had an affinity for managing people, particularly salespeople. And I will say that it's not often that you could go from being a successful salesperson to being a good manager. They're two totally different jobs, as I'm sure you're very aware. And
definitely different characteristics.
Exactly. So I actually, the reason why they made me a manager, I had landed the largest single account in the history of the company at that time. And about month 2 of enjoying this new business, which at that time was in the early 90s. At that time, we were pulling in about $1.6 million in revenue for this account. My boss came to me and he said, we're going to change your role next year. So you're not going to get commission on this only till the end of the year. You know, the typical story, you land this big account and then, you know, they basically told me, they said, you're not going to make more than the president of the company. So I said, well, what am I going to do? And they said, well, we want you to be a sales manager. And I said, sales manager? I'm a salesman. I don't, know anything about managing people. And they said, well, we're going to send you away to a week-long program through the American Management Association, and it's about becoming a good field sales manager. So field, I like that because I wasn't going to be stuck behind a desk. I'm not that guy. And so away I went with a colleague, and we both learned how to be managers in Ellis Paint, came back, and we totally revamped the sales organization, changed the way we compensated everybody. Of course, everybody freaked out. And we said, look, we're a small family-owned business. We don't have to do anything. Let's just try this. But we promise you, if you trust what we're implementing, everybody will be happy and everybody will be making more money before the year is up. About 8 to 10 months in, we were like the Pied Pipers. Everybody was making more money. We were killing it in sales. We were breaking sales and margin records. We were more profitable. The owner of the company is like, what are you guys doing? And we just said, we're just implementing what we learned at this AMA course. And it worked. And that was a really fun time in my career as a sales manager. Eventually, I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, and I was commuting. I stayed as a manager, and I was commuting down to LA, 4 days a week. I would be down there, and then I would fly back to the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon. And that became, just intolerable after, doing that for the better part of a year. And eventually I went back as a salesperson, but as an independent rep. And I repped Ellis. I repped another company that was out of the Bay Area called Sierra Performance Coatings, which is now a product line for Rust-Oleum. So I did the independent rep thing, and it was feast or famine. I'd have great months, then I'd have nothing for 2 months, and eventually I'm like, I really think I need to get a real job. And that's how I found my way into chemical distribution, which is what I do now. 2 business partners owned J.F. Shelton at the time. I went to work for him in 2005. And, they looked at my resume, they hired me, they made me an offer, and they said, look, we see that you've managed, there's no management positions here. You just, you're just going to be a salesman. We're, the 2 partners were the managers. And I said, hey, I need a job. I need to just be out there selling. And I worked for J.F. Shelton from 2005 till the end of 2014. And at the end of 2014, I went to work for Axalta, which was the DuPont coatings division. And, I had competed against DuPont when I was at Ellis, and they had everything. They had tank linings, they had the heavy duty industrial stuff, they had all the alkyd, products. They had a smattering of Waterborne at that time. And I used to bring in a bucket. I brought in a gallon of the DuPont Emron industrial label. And I set it on the Ellis Paint Company's, the technical director. I set it on his desk. I said, if you could make this, I could sell a lot of this product, under our label. If you can match this. And, so my frame of reference with DuPont was, the king of the industrial world. They had everything at that time. When I went to work for Axalta, they had already sold off most of their industrial coatings line, all the diversified products. They had sold it off to a company called Dudick, which I believe is now RPM. And so I'm like, well, what industrial products do we have? And they're like, well, we've got DuPont Emron Industrial, a couple of different versions of that. We've got a host of epoxy primers, but pretty much that was it. And, that world, their world, what they called industrial really was the heavy duty truck business. And, that was fun. I got to learn, truck painting, um, how that business works, where the insurance companies can get involved, and then the lower tier business or the more economically priced business, where that went, who were the players. I learned a lot. I had a great team. I managed a team of, anywhere from, depending on the year, 8 to 12 sales reps. Some of them were technicians, and the others were just straight up sales guys. Made a lot of great friends. It was a good experience, but without getting too deep into the weeds, I didn't really enjoy working for a global company that was managed by, at that time, a private equity company, and then eventually they became publicly traded, which is a different breed of cat. I came from family owned businesses, small businesses. All of a sudden, now I'm in this giant fishbowl, getting used to the SAP system, which bogs everything down. And about 2 years after I had left and went to Exalta, um, JF Shelton had come to me and said, "Hey, would you ever consider coming back to work for us in the chemical distribution, back in the chemical distribution world?" And I said, "Well, let's keep the home fire burning. Um, maybe we could square that circle." And eventually, I think it was almost the 4.5 year mark, I did go back to work for JF Shelton. About a year and a half in, almost 2 years in, we get bought out by Ravago. And I'm like, "Well, who's Ravago? I don't know who Ravago is." I come to find out they're a big, giant global company uh, out of Brussels, Belgium. And I'm like, "Wow, here I go again, back into the giant global company fishbowl." But I did learn something that perked my interest and gave me hope that it was going to be a different experience. And that was, Ravago is owned by one family. They're on their third generation of family ownership and management, and they're wonderful people. And they make it feel like a small company, even though their annualized revenues approach $18 billion. So this is the biggest company I've ever worked for, but it feels like I'm working for JF Shelton, a small chemical distributor out here in the Pacific Northwest. So as a 65-year-old guy, I feel like I could keep working until they finally say, "Hey, we don't need old guys anymore." I'm not managing. I don't want to manage anybody. I just want to sell. I love selling. I love people. So that's sort of the story.
I've noticed that when people that I interview, and then my time in the manufacturing side, that the European across the pond companies, they tend to have a longer lineage of family ownership, and they're treated a lot more like smaller companies. The atmosphere is different than, even if they're traded over there, because in some of those countries the government owns a small portion of all the companies, and here they're publicly traded. I mean, I've got buddies who work for BIC and Malaysia, IVM, Circa, and it's just a different atmosphere of ownership over there that doesn't feel so much like you're a cog in the wheel.
Yeah. I think they want to be in the business. You know what I mean? It's not like, I felt like at Exalta, we were answering to shareholders who really didn't understand the business. They just wanted a return on their investment. And I certainly get that. If I'm putting money somewhere, I want to see, growth. But it does change the culture. And I think you're right, Zach. The Europeans, everything's old in Europe. There's more tradition, in a lot of ways. And I just feel like the culture there is a little bit more employee centric. I could be wrong, but I feel like that's what you're describing.
The perception, definitely. Yeah, the perception is definitely that, I would say. So just because I've always, when you were at Exalta, and then I want to hit on Ellis, because I think I've heard of Ellis, but Exalta, were you there for the whole wood coatings buyout? Did you get to partake in any of that?
My group was liquid industrial, and we were separate when they first absorbed the Valspar. That was the Valspar wood group after after Sherwin bought them, and so they kept it separate at that time. Eventually, they brought under one managerial division. They brought the wood group in. Yeah, I think that's where you were going. I had just decided to leave at the time where they were bringing the wood group in. Actually, maybe it was about a year just before I left. We were sort of under one management group, but we still didn't have a lot of involvement. Now, my understanding from my my old team there is that they can they crossbreed. They can all sell.
Industrial's industrial. Doesn't matter what the surface is. Liquid industrial.
And they brought the powder group. They brought the powder group in as well.
And just straight industrial. Interesting. That's a whole nother world to selling powders and then selling liquid. That's an interesting crossover.
Yeah, it is. It is. But there's a lot of big industrial house users where they'll do both. And so it did make sense to keep the synergy, on the same playing field, and we could help each other. At least that was the the managerial game plan, if you will. So yeah, but yeah, I was to a limited degree a part of the wood group. Always liked the wood.
I think it's fun. I mean, you have a little more character. I mean, I like metal. And when I was in the manufacturing side, we did a lot of metal coatings. And I remember how fast the industry changes. Like when I came in, Finish Master was the god in light industrial. I mean, they were it. They sold so much light industrial. And I don't even know truly what the hell happened to them. They just went CEO after CEO. Now LKQ owns them, and they don't really do anything. And National Coatings, NCS, has just, they've exploded into the light industrial world. They are just going crazy.
And the reason is when they absorbed, I'm blanking right now on when NCS bought a bunch of automotive industrial paint stores, and I'm blanking on it was a PPG
SSI. Now it's SSI. Yeah.
The guy that came over from that group, NCS was smart enough to put him in charge of the industrial side of the business. His name is Dan Bolbalt. So you should interview Dan. He's a great guy, really smart. He really knows the industrial business. I know Dan because when I was trying to further the Exalta cause, we were trying to put a partnership together with them. I won't go into the story. There's a lot of backstory there. I think, Exalta kind of missed a boat there because they also had a very long-standing partnership with Finish Master. Zach, we could take 2 hours going through
we did some stuff. Like I know Kevin Nelson over at NCS, great guy. I've done some stuff with him and we did some stuff with Finish Master, and then because a lot of the guys at Finish Master went over to NCS. So, it's interesting being in this business and then seeing how you make the connections and they just float around to different companies depending on who's actually capitalizing in the market. It's such a huge industry, but it's so small.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like a family. That's one of the things I just love about this industry. Once you know, and once you're in the circle and you start knowing people, it never stops. And,
we used to say, Zach, once you get in the paint business, you never get out. You can try.
I was just about to say that.
I made an attempt or two, and then getting into the chemical side, the raw material side, it's a different side, but of the same business. And it's exactly the same as the coatings finish side. we all know each other. We all know, our competitors. We're all friends. We all fight for, sometimes we fight for the same slice of pie, and sometimes we help each other, but at the end of the day, we shake hands, and,
Go have a
the world,
beer and
exactly. The world's too small to burn bridges and make enemies. And I agree with you. That's what I love about the coatings business. It's fun. And I didn't realize that in my early career, how fun it was. I had delusions of grandeur about getting into other businesses. And, you know, at the end of the day, I knew coatings. And it's like, why fight that? This is what you know. This is what you're good at. Just, stay the course. See where it goes.
I had some young guys that kind of started to come in before I left my manufacturing side, and it was just, I would tell guys that wanted to get into it. It's not as sexy as telecom. It's not as sexy as medical sales. I mean, but you can make damn good money and have fun while you're doing it. Like, it's not stressful. You can have fun, know all your competition, go have a beer with them, and then see them out at a manufacturer that you're going to see, and you and your competition take customer out to lunch, and they're just sitting there going, you guys are fighting for my business, but you're talking about stories, and you were just at this show, and like, this is weird. And I'd always be like, hey, we're here to have fun.
I had one experience sort of along these lines, but on the negative side. So I was making a sales call. I was on a sales trip making a sales call that I had arranged in advance with a company. And the incumbent was just failing and, struggling to get a product to work in this environment. And it was UV Cure, which at the time on guitars of all things. And at that time it was very fledgling, new. And this guy was trying to put a UV line together, and it was just a nightmare. And it wasn't the coating's fault. It was just, I think it was an idea a little bit ahead of its time, and they just needed to walk a little bit more before they ran. But the guy that was running the plant just had a mandate, by ownership to get this thing done. And it was just one of those things where you were set up for failure. So I'm totally unaware of what's going on. I go into the meeting with the principal, the manager of the guitar finishing plant, and he brings me into a conference room. So I sit down and I'm looking over my notes and getting ready to give him my elevator pitch on, why our products are going to work better than XYZ. And in walks the salesman from the incumbent product line. And I'm like, well, this is weird. Why would they bring my competitor in? Well, the guy that is, the manager of the production line proceeds to berate the salesman from the incumbent line and points at me and says, we're going to go to this guy if you don't get your act together. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, time out.
No.
I said, look, this is not how I work. Let's just end this meeting now. And we ended the meeting. And I pulled the sales rep out, and I said, look, if I would have known you were going to be here, I would have never agreed to this meeting. That's wrong to do at any level. And I said, this guy's unprofessional. I'm out of here. I don't want to do business with somebody that treats their incumbent this way. We have to fight for the business on an equal playing field. May the best paint company win, but this is wrong. And so that was quite an experience to show how small the industry is.
I could see that. I mean, I've had customers have done that. Not quite to that level, but, they've tried it. And I'm with you. It's just, there's no point in that. I mean, we're all in it to have a good time and feed our families, and we like it. Like, that's just, I wouldn't want to do business with somebody that does like that either.
No, it was quite an experience. But again, telling how small the industry is and how these things happen, it just, you have to be careful of those things. I learned a great lesson in that moment. And, it's a character building thing, because you don't want to walk away from what you think is a great opportunity. You don't want to get, delusions of grandeur that I'm going to land this, high volume piece of business. And then all of a sudden this happens. It's like, hey, some things aren't worth having.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if he does that to one guy, he's going to do it again.
Exactly. It's just his MO.
Yeah, exactly. So let's kind of hit on Ravago a little bit. I know you kind of told us they were out of Belgium. For the people listening and for the community here, we've got some finishers that, not 100% familiar with the manufacturing side. So kind of tell us about Ravago, what they offer, again, how long they've been around, what their key resin systems are, where they excel on that side, and then kind of go from there.
So Ravago, as I understand the story historically, and I'll probably butcher it, and it might be better to interview a legacy Ravago person to give the proper history. Maybe we can arrange that at some point. But it's actually a company that's centric in plastics, the plastics market. As I understand the origin, they started back in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, actually recycling plastic. In fact, my understanding is they are the largest recycler of carpet in the world. And, carpet is made from, synthetic materials that are plastic oriented. And so they started doing that. And then they somehow turned the recycled product into a resin that could be used back in the plastics world. And I think from there, they started to realize that distribution of chemicals that go along with that market could be a diversification of the business that they were starting to enjoy. And so they got into the distribution side of the chemical world. And then they started to diversify the industries that they called on. I work in the case markets, coatings, case, elastomers, sealants, coatings. Why am I blanking on A? Anyway, that's the side of the business, Zach, that you come from, the coating side. So we have a division that represents 25 to 30 principals. We call them principals, but they're manufacturer vendors of raw materials that go into a bucket of paint. So I sell everything that makes a bucket of paint. And I call on paint manufacturers. Some of the people that you work for, we call on those folks, like a Gemini, or at the time they were in business, I called on Kelly Moore in the Texas market.
That's a whole nother story.
In the Pacific Northwest, I call on Rada, Miller, a smaller company, Premier. More on the architectural side up here. Forest down in Eugene, they're more liquid industrial. They also do a little bit of powder. So I call on those types of paint companies, and I try to further my cause in selling them raw materials to make the coatings. And what we do at Ravago, what we like to say is we provide solutions to problems. So, a salesperson from, let's say, at Forest Paint walks into the office and says, look, we're having trouble with this product. They're really centric in high heat coatings. So we're having a problem getting good flow and leveling, let's say, on this particular high heat coating. I call on the lab. The lab has been instilled with the responsibility to fix the problem, and I might be able to provide an additive that gives them better flow and leveling, a dispersant or a flow agent, something that changes the rheology and fixes the problem for the sales guy out in the field. So that's basically what I do. I provide solutions through the 25, 30, 40 companies that Ravago represents in the marketplace. It's a lot to keep track of at times. And my old memory sometimes struggles, but man, every day is like something new. And that's why I went from the coatings sales, which I absolutely love because there's a lot of cool things about selling coatings, but it's also really interesting to fix problems that I'm very familiar with from my coatings background. And so, and I found myself working for JF Shelton, and then eventually it became Ravago. This is like a side of the business that I knew existed, but I'm now on my, let's see, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'm on my 14th year of being in the raw material business. So I've seen it all, or almost all. I guess you can't say you've seen it all, but I've seen a lot from both sides. I bring an interesting perspective from both sides.
That was kind of like my unique entry, owning a finishing company, high-end painting company for over 12 years and running jobs, using the products. And then I sold that business and we moved to Texas. And then I got into the manufacturing side. I mean, it was just eye-opening to see how the products are made and what goes in them and stuff that you wouldn't think that's in paint because you're told never to mix the two, but it's in every gallon of paint. But under, forced compatibility, and start learning all this stuff. So like the perspective, like you said, like applying these coatings and then going to the side of manufacturing, understanding a little more of how it's made to then be able to help the applicators in a way that they understand, because I was an applicator. So I always kind of say, like, I was talking to my wife and she was like, so, because I left CIC and the company that I was previously with to do the podcast and kind of do some coaching, consulting, help guys and see if I like it. I don't know. So far it's fun, but I mean, who knows? Let's get 2 years into it. And then she's like, well, what would you next? And I was like, I always thought, I was like, my next progression, I think, would probably be going into raw materials or equipment. Cause I think that would be, because I talked to some suppliers about, centrifuges to make the resins. And for some reason that just blows my mind. I'm like, I just want to see how the resins are made now. Like, that's the next thing, talking to these different resin suppliers or manufacturers that all over the world. That's what I want to see. I want to see, you think centrifuges and you're like, most people are like, wait a minute, centrifuge? Like, and then how you make like atomic weapons? Like, wait a minute. And I'm like, you only see the bad part of that stuff. Now, the good side of it is what those centrifuges can produce for the country. So I always thought that to be fun.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you this, Zach, if you ever want to interview people on the resin side of the business, the manufacturing of resins, I could hook you up. We represent
definitely.
We represent, one sort of main line and then a few auxiliary lines where I shouldn't say main line. We represent 2 to 3 different resin manufacturers that have their niche in the marketplace, their niche in the marketplace. So we're sort of fortunate in that way. A lot of good people. The thing I always found interesting about the coatings business and how polymers and the additives impact what happens at the finish side where you cut your teeth initially is how applicators in that world could adapt, because selling industrial coatings is so different than, let's say, selling automotive coatings. Automotive coatings, I always said when I went to work for Axalta, I always felt like automotive coatings was sort of for lack of a better description, a templated business. So everybody has a really high, super high quality product, PPG, Sherwin, BASF, Axo Nobel, Axalta. You just go down the list of all those companies. They have great technology. And, you could walk into a spray booth and hand a good painter any version of, the offerings on the marketplace, and he can make that car look like a sheet of glass. What's hard in our business, and I know you know where I'm going with this, is the industrial world, because it's a less templated world, every application is different because of the environment. A lot of applications happen in, uncontrolled environments. They don't have the luxury of a high-end spray booth, and they got to make it work to their customer satisfaction. And what I always was amazed with is the application experts, how they could take that coating and work with it, solvent adjustments, dryer adjustments, pot life, adjustments, and they could still make it look like it's supposed to look.
You're a little mini scientist.
Yeah, I had some guys literally that they just, they didn't have a degree in chemistry, but these guys are bench chemists. I got a guy that lives up here in the Pacific Northwest, is a freaking genius that worked for me at Axalta. He could make anything look good in any application because it's like an art. And I was always so blown away at people that had that skill set. I was a sales guy. I was a sales guy and a sales manager. I know how to do that, but I needed the application experts to make me look good, and we helped each other. But that was the side of the business that fascinated me. So it's interesting that you're fascinated by the resin, the polymer people, and how that happens. It's sort of a mutual admiration society.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. And what I thought was an interesting, I knew a couple guys that were in automotive finishing, and they wanted out of a booth, and so they went into like industrial, and they struggle. And then you take an industrial guy and you put him in a booth, and he's like, holy crap, this is like a day off. Everything's perfect in here. Like, what in the world?
72 degrees, perfect environment. Finish the job, walk out, hit the, turn on the oven, get a little force curing. Everything is magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same thing.
Yeah.
Heavy duty truck, it's an amazing, I think that's what makes this business so fun, is all the different applications and how they happen in the environments they happen in. It's, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, you could go into these higher, these higher margin businesses like high tech and what have you, and maybe you can make more money, but I defy you to have more fun than we do, and have more diversity of experience. The longer you do this, the better it gets. I just want to tell the young people, because we're not hiring enough young people in our business. I just want to say, just stick it out. Just stick it out. You're going to love this career. It's a great career.
And that's kind of one of the goals that I have, because if we don't get, for the podcast and reaching people, if we don't get more younger people in this business, it's going to die out. I mean, there's a lot of people that are aging out everywhere from finisher all the way to, principals of companies. It's okay to start a paint company, get out there and have fun, So I've always, that's a big push to me, is to get people out of college. You don't have to go into tech sales, man. Just come on over to the dirty side of paint. It's okay. It's okay to get a little dirty.
Yeah, there's, we used to always say, you may not be able to, become a multi-millionaire in the paint business, but you'll always have a job. And, because the world needs paint. It's just the way it is. Maybe someday that'll change, not in my lifetime, probably not in the next 2 lifetimes, but, it's such a great business to be in. I would love, in the twilight of my career, I would love to be a part of recruiting young people to get into this business. I feel like, that would be my way of giving back, because we're going to be in trouble. There's a lot of guys my age that are going to age out. They're going to, want to eventually retire. And we need to backfill, and we're behind the 8 ball. We got to get on the stick. I applaud what you're doing here. I think this is something that's a long time in coming. I've always thought, I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts, when I'm traveling and, every day. And so, I think that's how we met on LinkedIn. I sent you a note and said, dude, I love the idea of what you're doing. So I want to be a part of it in any way that I can help you. I've got a vast network.
I'll tap into that for sure. Yeah, yeah. So I was going to hit on, like, going back to Ravago, we were talking about them, like, being that you're doing on the supplier side, you're working with these manufacturers that are saying, all right, here's what we're working on. Like, what are you seeing any new technology or any new products emerging that the manufacturers of the raw materials are saying, hey, this is going to be some awesome shit. Let's go.
Yeah. It's sort of a yes and no answer, because a lot of formulation houses, are reluctant to change things, that are working and are successful on the resin side. And then, as a bolt on, the additives that go into the resins that make the different coatings, I'm seeing some innovation. We just talked to one of our suppliers that talked about a new line of polyurethane dispersions. So waterborne single component polyurethane chemistry. You can catalyze it if need be. They have ways to cure some of these PUDs, but there is some new chemistry, innovative chemistry on the polyurethane dispersion side for the areas of the country that are sort of forced into regulatory applications. Sometimes a waterborne is the only choice. And so I'm seeing a lot of great chemistry. When I worked for Ellis Paint Company I started in 1983, waterborne was not a thing, that was of any functionality. The first waterbornes that I saw come on the market were water reducible alkyds, and they were, they had their obstacles to success.
Yeah, they're still to this day, they're the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many hundreds or maybe thousands of gallons that just got burned because you have that syneresis issue, and then all of a sudden the products, you can't save it. It's unusable. In those early days, it was a problem. It's still a bit of an issue, but now, they've, the resin suppliers are better, but the acrylics are fantastic. The polyurethane dispersions that chemistry has come a long way. I would say, we're going to see it just continue to improve over the coming years, because it's going to be the way.
When we start talking about water-based PUDs, polyurethane dispersions, in my previous life, that's, we did that, and acrylics. And I think the one area that I've always wanted to see water PUDs kind of advance is their chemical scratch mar, their durability as a single component against acrylic, because acrylic has always been better durability than a PUD without a hardener of some kind. So are they working on advancing that side of PUDs at all?
I would say they're there or close to there if you want to compare. Certainly from the standpoint of exterior durability, they're superior. We work with, like I say, we work with 2 to 3 different resin manufacturers, and they all, like I say, have their niche in the marketplace. But that PUD chemistry has come a long way. Direct to surface, direct to metal, is very good. Salt spray resistance, the QUV cabinet, ASTM testing has come a long way. We should definitely get a chemist technical support representative from some of the people that we represent to come on the show.
Yeah, that would be a great one.
Give you some real insight, because we work with some brilliant people. I mean, I don't know how deep in the weeds you would want to get, with the super, PhDs, but we work with some people that are the feet on the streets on the technical side that are just fantastic. And they could explain from a chemical perspective why this works, why it's better for this application. And what I always say, Zach, is when I call on a paint lab, the first thing I tell them is I'm not technical. Now, that's a bit of a misnomer because I'm technical for a sales guy, but I'm not a chemist. And I never want to mislead a customer, a chemist, that's working on, his ass off on the bench and then say the wrong thing that's going to make his job even more difficult. So I tell him I'm not technical, but I can put you in contact with somebody that can answer your questions and help maybe shorten the learning curve, for you to have this solution in a can that your guys can start spraying or brushing and rolling. And so as a sales guy, what I've found is build the relationship of trust. There's a lot of people that can they know how to close. They know all the nomenclature, the terminologies. Those things are important. I don't discount that. But at the beginning of the day, a good salesperson likes people. What we've already described, that you like people, you care about people, and you are good at building a relationship of trust. So that chemist wants to do business with you. He trusts that if Pete comes into the lab, he's going to have somebody that's going to have the right solution for this application.
Yeah, and I've always preached that sales is about relationships. If you build the relationships, sales is a byproduct. I mean, of having it's all about the relationships. You got to do that.
And here's what we have to convince the new generation of, Zach, is these things happen eyeball to eyeball. They don't happen necessarily on a computer, sending an email, sending a text. Even, phone calls are important, but you got to be in front of that person. You got to break bread with that person. You got to learn about who they are, about their family. These are important things. Exactly. And, that's what I'm trying to impart to the young guys that work at Ravago, how important that is. I know we're sort of getting off on a tangent. You warned me early on that would happen, but
it always does. That's the purpose of it,
The original question was, where's the new technology? What's out there? There's a lot of things that are, I like to say, sort of new. I haven't seen anything that jumps out of the can and paints itself on yet. We used to say, that's the goal. That customer wants the product to just jump out of the can and paint itself on.
Do itself and never go bad.
Yeah, exactly. But there are things that are innovative, and I think it would be great to bring in a Kent Maga Hut, let's say, from Lubrizol, or a Chris Lefevre from EPS, or Tim Bedell from Scott Botter, and a host of other people, even people we don't represent at Ravago. I have a Rolodex. You notice I use the word Rolodex.
I was about to say, for those of you that are new to this show, a Rolodex predates an iPhone.
Anyway, yeah, it would be great to maybe have an innovation show, like what's new. We sort of do that in the Pacific Northwest and all over the country. There's an organization called Society for Coatings Technology. In the PNW, it's the PNW SCT, Pacific Northwest Society for Coating Technology. And I went through that process of being on the committee all the way to being the president of the organization some years back. And we would always have principals come in. We call a principal event. Vendors are what we call principals. So we would have a principal come in and give a technical talk to the chemists in the PNW, all the different companies that we represent, all my competitors that represent the same company. We all get in a room and they would give a technical talk, and maybe it was generic. They weren't really allowed to promote their brand, but they would promote the technology and the innovation. So I would think this would be a great platform to do something like that.
I agree. I think that would be awesome.
I know a lot of companies would love the airtime. What we need to do, Zach, is promote this show to both sides of the business, because your initial promotion is to the coatings application guys, which are vitally important. But we also need to promote this to the coatings manufacturers, and how their world applies to the guys at the end of the gun.
Exactly. Like, well, my goal is dual fold and work into that side. So, the manufacturers can listen in as we have finishers on and find out what the problems they're having are, and they can offer products, and same vice versa. Manufacturers can say, hey, this is what we're struggling, this is what we're thinking, and end users can hear it and listen and say, okay, yeah, that would be awesome. That's what we need. That back and forth dialogue that gets cut out a lot because people think we got to stay separate. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, we got to talk. That's how we get to that next level.
Bring both worlds together, because both worlds exist to support each other. The manufacturers of these products that make a really good bucket of paint, they need to know from the guys in the spray booth or out in the field, what's happening with the polymers that they're manufacturing and how they're being used exactly. What happens in a lab doesn't always translate to the field, and vice versa.
And I've been in that lab. It doesn't. I mean, it's a different world. So I'm going to loop back to the younger guys, because you've been here, and we're trying to get more younger people involved. As a guy that's done distribution all the way to raw materials, what advice, any resources or skills that these guys need to learn to develop to be able to go into that side? I mean, what advice would you have for the young guys coming in and how they can hone their skill?
Yeah, I would say if you're going into a sales role, first and foremost, like I said before, you have to like people, and you have to be willing to have those face-to-face meetings. You can't be timid. You can't be shy. You can't be afraid to make a mistake, but you have to always be honest about who you are and what you represent. I think that's vitally important on the sales side. If you have an affinity, if you're young in the high school age group, and you have an affinity toward science and the STEM type subjects, go to school. There's some great programs in North America now, great university programs that are coatings chemistry centric. One of the best ones on the West Coast is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. They have a fantastic chemistry program for the people that want to go into the coatings business. That's another avenue that on a podcast like this should be promoted. There's a school in Missouri. They're all over the country now. It's not just San Luis Obispo. That's what I'm very familiar with because I'm a West Coast guy. But you should interview the people that run those programs at the university level. If you want to promote young people to go into our business at the chemistry side in the labs, I know that when Kelly Moore was in business, and I don't know if you know this, but that plant got purchased by Grupo Sayerlab.
It still sounds so weird to hear. I mean, my father-in-law used them for 30 years when Kelly Moore was in business. You just still blows my mind. But yeah, Sayerlab out of Mexico bought them, right?
Out of Mexico. They bought the plant, 330,000 square feet under roof. Very modern plant. I think for the last 5 years, Todd over there told me that they had modernized that plant. So it was a great plant for somebody to buy. It's no longer Kelly Moore, but it's going to be called GPS Coatings. But my point is, when Todd Werdzik was running the R&D center there in Hurst, Texas, he hired young chemists from the San Luis Obispo program. I don't know, there was 10 or 12 of them. And, smart young kids that went through that, San Luis Obispo program. And then boom, Todd, because he had been through that program, said, hey, this is a target-rich environment to hire young people. We need more Todd Wordziks in the world that, that promote and recruit from those organizations, those universities that have these programs. Again, maybe he would be a great guy to interview.
I think it's also worth maybe kind of throwing in there that I've seen in my history, not as long, but that great. If you want to go to one of those programs, if you don't, I've seen sales guys go to lab techs and then become bench chemists without a chemistry degree. I mean, there's avenues if you don't think you're a college person and you start as a sales guy and you find an affinity for the chemistry side, there's avenues to get into the lab as a technical bench chemist without going to college. College is great, but you can still get there. It's not a requirement in this industry that you have to be college educated, even just to make paint.
Yeah. I totally feel exactly what you're saying. I experience it in the Pacific Northwest on a day-to-day basis. I can introduce you to chemists that have no degree. They're on the bench. They're fabulous. And on the job training. If a lot of times I like to cook. I understand a cooking recipe. A paint formula is pretty much the same thing. And if you have an affinity toward that, you have the potential to be a good bench chemist. We need to be about the business of promoting what we do for everybody. There's a spot for everybody if you have the aptitude for it. And some people, like I'm not a math guy. I'm not a super technical guy. I'm a talker, as you can obviously see. I've made my living on being able to communicate with people and build that relationship. We just need to tell the story to as many people as we can, and hopefully we get our share of young people. And that's I think how. That's right. That's right. I mean, when you're in a business, and you mentioned something about your father-in-law applying Kelly Moore paint. My dad was a painting contractor. That's how I got the job in the paint store when I was 16. He said, you're going to get your first job in the paint business. I said, well, you mean I have to paint houses this summer? And he goes, no, you're going to sweep the floors where I buy my paint. The guy wants to hire a stock boy. And so that's how I got started. I don't have a college degree. I didn't finish college, but I've made a 40 plus year career and been very successful, without a degree. Sometimes people say, God, I thought you had a degree. Well, I didn't. Life took me a different direction. Right. Life took me a different direction, and I found an opportunity and I ran with it. And I had my bumps and my ups and downs, but I stayed the course. And all these years later, I can look back and say, what a great ride. I wouldn't do it any different. I can't even imagine.
It seems weird. Yeah. At one point I thought I wanted to get out of this industry, and, you mentioned it earlier. It is a black hole. I mean, when I sold my business, I thought I was going to get out of it, 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago. And nope. Still in.
But Zach, what you're doing is so good. This is something I don't think it's being done anywhere else in the country. I mean, maybe it is that I'm not aware of.
I mean, I don't know. There's a couple podcasts that are out there, but they don't really, not at the aspect of the way I feel like I want to approach it, which was kind of the reason for doing it. It's, manufacturers talk to manufacturers. Now, I want everyone talking to everybody. Like this is a two-way street. We're all in it together. We all have to communicate. And from being an applicator to now being, to then go into manufacturing, like I understand the need for that cross communication, because it made one of the key ingredients, I think, to making the Centurion line that I helped grow so successful is keeping that communication open to the bench. I mean, to be willing to go in there and, hey, let's work on this. This isn't working. How can we change it? Customers are saying this, and not just shutting them out and saying, well, use it or go away. I mean, I've thought that's been a huge part of the success.
Let me just say one thing about the smaller companies. They're more apt to innovate. Now, some big companies innovate, and they innovate in certain marketplaces. But my experience is the really big manufacturers, they have their toolbox, and they don't like to deviate from the toolbox. The small companies like a Centurion and the smaller companies that niche themselves out in the marketplace are willing to look at innovation. And they'll fill that void in the marketplace that produces itself. I always adhere to the saying, nature abhors a vacuum. And so that vacuum's going to get filled. It may not get filled with one of the big boys. That's the beauty of this business, that even the small guys have a place. If they find that niche and they become good at whatever it is, they can innovate in that niche and outperform the big boys who may not be willing to, deviate too much from that that toolbox.
And if you're an entrepreneur and you go after one of those niches, I mean, I've long said entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they like building stuff and selling it. They don't really necessarily want to be a legacy. I mean, an entrepreneur is someone that loves starting companies over after company after company. This is a great industry because you find one of those niches and you grow it and you do it better than the big guys. Then the big guys come along and say, I don't need to create that. I just need to go buy that. That guy's already done all the work. Hey, why don't you let me buy you? And as an entrepreneur, that's the goal. I mean, and this is a great industry to have that in. I mean,
on a different side of the market, I remember when I first got into, the paint business at Ellis Paint Company, we built a dealer network. Like a small, let's just say a network of paint stores, like a Finish Master, not all under one roof, just independently owned paint stores. And at that time in the 80s and 90s, there was a ton of independent paint dealers. And then all of a sudden they started either going out of business because they couldn't compete with the big boxes and the big chain operations, these independents. But now I've noticed, Zach, that little by little they're popping up. And they're specializing. I know a guy, because I've seen on LinkedIn, a guy named Russell Brasher over in Southern California. He's got, he manages, I think now they're on their second or third store, a totally customer serviced type of business. A lot of wood coatings. They've niched themselves out. They've found a niche in the marketplace as an independent. They're competing against the big boxes and they're winning their share. So I guess that goes to my point is I don't get discouraged anymore when I see the big boys come in and they capture a market. Well, that's a low margin market. You don't want to be in that market anyway. Find the niche. And the Russell Brashers of the world are succeeding because they've carved out a niche and said, we're just going to do it better than anybody else. And that's the attitude you have to take into that opportunity. That's what we have to communicate to the young people. You need to interview Russell.
I think Russell, I love Russell. I mean, he's a Centurion distributor and I met him. We did a lot of stuff with All Pro. And I've got a lot of guys from the all pro world that are going to come on and distributors too. That's the other side. I want distributors on, all these independents. They can give their story and how they've gotten to that point. Because that's another area that we need. But yeah, I'll reach out to Russell and get him on. I know he'd be a great one. He's always so energetic. I mean, you can't be low energy around Russell. He brings everyone up to his energy level and it's just incredible.
When you talk to him the next time, tell him Pete Cutrona said hi. We have a little bit of a backstory history, but in a what I think was positive. So good dude. I know he was with Mann Brothers, I think, for a while.
what's the line that RPM owns now? That's like the special effects stuff.
Modern Masters.
Modern Masters. He was with Modern Masters. He was a company rep for them, distributor rep, manufacturer rep.
Was a great little company before. Well, I mean, even after they got bought out by RPM. I actually had dinner with the former owner of that company last night. He's another guy you probably want to interview.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do kind of, the one thing I like to kind of wrap things up with is to the community, to kind of get to know Pete better, is what's Pete outside of Ravago? Like, I mean, what's a passion and a hobby that might surprise people that you have?
Oh, gosh. Well, it just really, I discovered when I turned 30 that I have an artistic side. So I don't do it as much anymore, but I dabble in sculpting with clay. I used to do people portraits. I could, sculpt a block of clay and make it look like you.
Wow, that's impressive.
I discovered at a very, when I was 30 years old. I never thought I had any artistic ability. So that's one kind of weird, unique thing. I love to play tennis. I played tennis for 35 years. I love to play golf. Not very good at golf, but I love to play it. I'm dabbling now in pickleball. I want to become a pickleball player. And I like road cycling. I have a bike that I ride here at my Portland house, and I have a bike at my Tucson house. And I love riding bikes. So those are sort of the things I love to do. I think those are the things that scratch the passion itch, so to speak. I have a significant other, Debbie, who keeps me honest. We've been together since 2005. Still going strong. She's my world. I love her with all the fiber of my being. I have 2 adopted stepdaughters, and I have a son who is 28. My oldest stepdaughter is 37. My middle stepdaughter is 30, and I'm blessed. I'm a very blessed human being.
That sounds like a pretty awesome life. Mine are 6 and 3, so I got a long ways to go.
Cherish every moment. Trust me.
I do. I mean, I love it. And that's another thing. Going this route has provided me with the ability to spend more time with them, and I absolutely, I love it. Like, they may drive me bonkers, but still love the crap out of them.
You'll never get these years back.
That is true. Yeah, man, Peter, I just thank you for taking your time. I really appreciate it. I mean, the insights that you had were amazing. Any last words of wisdom for our community and the young guys out there?
One little saying comes to mind: when you're through changing, you're through. So don't fear change. That's been something that's helped me. I had to bump my head a lot of times when I resisted change. It's inevitable. It's part of the journey of life. I mean, we could get into the philosophies maybe another time, but I'll leave it at that. I support everything you're doing, Zach, and I want to be a part of it in any way that I can to help. So.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll definitely talk some more about getting some guys. And I've been thinking about doing some panel episodes where we get 3 or 4 guys on there and get questions submitted from listeners. And then we can just kind of go through and do Q&A episodes. I think that would be a huge one to have chemists on for.
Yeah, let's get these worlds married even closer together that make up this industry that we love. Let's get this thing married up a little bit tighter, and everybody will be better off.
Definitely, man. Awesome. Love it. Thank you for coming on the Bearded Finisher podcast. I appreciate everybody listening. We look forward to seeing you on another episode. It was awesome. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Zach.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the Bearded Finisher podcast. We thank everyone for joining. Keep hustling, keep learning, and never settle for anything less than your best. Remember, the path to perfection is a journey, not a destination. Until next time.